My in-laws used my promotion as their retirement plan. The toast I gave next sent my wife straight to court. During my promotion party, my father-in-law announced, "We're moving in with you and selling our house." My wife agreed. "It's already decided." I raised my glass and exclaimed, "Excellent news, you can move in next week." The champagne glass felt weightless in my hand as my father-in-law, Frank Donovan, clinked his fork against his crystal tumbler and announced the news. We were standing in Marcellus's private dining room, an Italian restaurant downtown where my company had reserved 28 seats to celebrate my promotion to Director of Operations. My colleagues were still applauding the speech my CEO had just delivered about my dedication and strategic vision. Frank cleared his throat and smiled, as if he were about to deliver good news. "Since we're all gathered here celebrating Ethan's success," he said, his voice carrying across the room with the confidence of someone used to being heard, "Margaret and I wanted to share our own exciting announcement." My wife, Claire, stood next to her father, beaming, and something about her expression made my stomach drop before he even finished the sentence. "We've decided to sell our house in Westfield and move in with Ethan and Claire. It just makes sense at our age, and this way we can all be together as a family." After a brief silence, my coworker smiled politely. My boss, Martin, looked perplexed but raised his glass anyway. Claire squeezed my arm and leaned into the microphone that had previously been used for toasts. "It's already decided," she said, her voice light and cheerful, as if she were announcing a vacation. "We have been planning this for weeks. Dad and Mom will be selling their home next month and moving into ours. It'll be wonderful to have them close by." She looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to say something encouraging and enthusiastic. I could feel 28 sets of eyes on me. My hand tightened around the champagne glass, and I worried it would shatter. I slowly raised it and kept my voice steady. "Wonderful news," I exclaimed, the words tasting like acid. "You can move in next week," he says, just as I finished packing my belongings. The silence that ensued was absolute. Claire's smile had frozen on her face. Frank's expression changed from confident to confused. My boss, Martin, raised his eyebrows. Margaret, my mother-in-law, who had been standing near the appetizer table, turned pale. I carefully placed the champagne glass on the nearest table before exiting the private dining room and walking through the main restaurant to the parking lot. Behind me, I could hear Claire calling my name in a stunned conversation. But I kept walking until I got to my car. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't put the key in the ignition for more than 28 seconds. I'd been married to Claire for 5 years, or 7 if you included the 18 months we dated before I proposed. We met at a networking event through a mutual friend, when I was a senior analyst at a logistics company and she was working on event planning for a nonprofit. Claire had been charming and vivacious, the type of person who could converse with anyone and make them feel like the most interesting person in the room. She told me how motivated and ambitious I was, and how much she admired my career focus and work ethic. Our early relationship was fun and easy, with weekends spent exploring the city and evenings spent cooking dinner together and talking about our days. Claire had been supportive and proud of me when I was promoted to manager and then senior manager, attending company events, and becoming friends with the spouses of my colleagues. The problems with her parents had begun gradually enough that I hadn't noticed the pattern until years into our marriage. Frank and Margaret lived in Westfield, about 35 minutes away, in a 3-bedroom colonial that they had purchased 27 years ago. Frank had retired as a regional sales director at the age of 60, and he spent his days golfing and complaining about the economy. Margaret had never worked outside the home and spent her time on garden club and church committees. They were comfortable, but not wealthy, relying on Frank's pension and social security. They had always treated Claire as if she were their little girl, in need of constant guidance and protection. Frank would call Claire twice a week for advice on everything from our mortgage to the car we should buy. Margaret would show up unannounced at our house with casseroles and suggestions for furniture placement. Claire never pushed back, never mentioned that we needed space or boundaries. Instead, she'd thank them profusely and carry out whatever suggestions they'd made, even if they directly contradicted plans we'd previously discussed. Claire and I agreed in our third year of marriage to save for a down payment on a larger suburban home. We opened a joint savings account and committed to saving $1,800 per month. 5 months in, I discovered Claire had been withdrawing money to pay for her parents' various expenses, including a new roof and a cruise they had wanted to take. When I confronted her, she cried and said her parents had raised her, and she couldn't refuse when they needed help. We had fought about it for weeks before reaching an uneasy agreement in which Claire promised to discuss any financial gifts to her parents with me first. Margaret needed emergency dental work that was not covered by their insurance after about 7 months of compromise. Claire had transferred $2,750 without informing me until I noticed the withdrawal while reviewing our accounts. Over time, the pattern had repeated itself with various justifications. Frank's car needed major repairs. Margaret had planned to remodel their kitchen. They needed help with their property taxes. Claire had given them money from our joint account on multiple occasions, and she had always been defensive when I questioned it. "They're my parents," she would say. "They would do anything for me. The least I could do was assist them when they needed it." I had mentioned that they appeared to require assistance on an increasing frequency and in larger amounts. Claire accused me of being selfish and cold-hearted about family. My promotion to Director of Operations followed nearly 4 years of intensive work on a major efficiency initiative that saved my company more than $1.6 million per year. The position came with a significant salary increase from $92,000 to $138,000, plus performance bonuses and stock options. I was overjoyed and immediately began thinking about how the additional income would allow us to accelerate our savings goals and possibly start a family. Claire had also been excited. Or so I thought. She had helped plan the promotion party and looked genuinely proud when I told her the news. What I hadn't realized was that she'd been sharing our financial information with her parents, who had been making plans based on my increased earning potential. Sitting in my car in the restaurant parking lot, I took out my phone and texted my younger brother, Luke, a corporate attorney in the city. "We need to talk as soon as possible. Emergency." He responded within 2 minutes, stating that he'd call me in 10. I started driving, not home, but to a coffee shop near my office, where I could think uninterrupted. Claire was already calling my phone. I forwarded them all to voicemail. Luke was already calling as I pulled into the coffee shop parking lot. I responded, and the entire story came tumbling out. The announcement, Claire's claim that it was already decided, and my public declaration that I would be moving out. Luke patiently listened until I finished. Then he asked, "Did Claire ever discuss this with you before tonight? Any talk about her parents moving in?" I told him, "No, nothing. We had never discussed her parents living with us. We had planned to have children, so we bought a 3-bedroom house in a good school zone neighborhood. There was no room for long-term house guests, even if I had wanted them to stay." Luke paused for a moment before saying, "You need to talk to a divorce attorney, like tomorrow. If Claire makes unilateral decisions about your shared home without your approval, you have serious marital issues. And if they intend to move in based on your new salary, you must protect yourself financially." The word divorce hit me like a cold water. I'd been so caught up in the shock of the announcement that I hadn't fully processed the fact that my wife had made this decision without me. Luke referred me to Rebecca Caldwell, a family law attorney who handled his colleague's divorce 18 months ago. He described Rebecca as sharp and did not waste time with reconciliation counseling when the situation was clearly broken. I thanked him and sat in my car for another 18 minutes, watching people walk in and out of the cafe. My phone kept buzzing with Claire's texts, which ranged from confused to, "Where did you go?" "Everyone is concerned," to "Angry, you embarrassed me in front of everyone," to guilt-tripping, "I can't believe you'd react this way to my parents' need for assistance." None of them acknowledged that she had made a major life decision without consulting me. I drove to the Marriott downtown and reserved a room for the week. The desk clerk inquired if I was in town for business, and I replied yes because it was easier than explaining that I was hiding from my own wife. Once inside the room, I dialed Rebecca Caldwell's emergency number. Her voicemail stated that she would return calls the same day for urgent matters. I left a message explaining that my wife had just announced that her parents were moving into our home without my knowledge or consent, and I needed legal advice right away. Then I sat on the hotel bed, trying to process what had just happened in my life. 5 hours ago, I was celebrating my most significant professional achievement. Now I was alone in a hotel room, contemplating divorce. Rebecca Caldwell called me at 7 the next morning. She was direct and efficient, asking specific questions about my marriage, our financial situation, and the events of the previous night. I explained everything, including Claire's history of giving money to her parents and making financial decisions without consulting with me. Rebecca listened intently and stated, "This isn't just about her parents moving in. This concerns a pattern in which your wife prioritizes her parents' needs over your marriage and makes unilateral decisions about shared assets. That's a fundamental breach of the partnership marriage is supposed to be." She said she'd see me that afternoon and we'd talk about my options, which included legal separation and divorce. She asked if I co-owned the house with Claire, and I said yes. We purchased it 5 years ago, with both of our names on the deed and mortgage. The meeting with Rebecca was eye-opening. Her office was in a downtown high-rise, tastefully decorated with law degrees from Northwestern and 24 years of bar admission certificates on the walls. She had me go over our entire financial situation, including my salary, Claire's income from her part-time event planning work, which brought in approximately $32,000 per year, our assets, and our debts. She asked detailed questions about Claire's parents' gifts, and I estimated that we had given them between $38,000 and $47,000 during our 5-year marriage. Rebecca's eyebrows rose at that number. She asked, "Did you ever get any of that money back?" I told her, "No, it was all gifts with no expectation of repayment." Rebecca took notes and said, "In a divorce, those gifts could be considered dissipation of marital assets, especially if made over your objection or without your knowledge." Rebecca explained my options methodically. I could seek marriage counseling and try to set better boundaries with Claire's parents, but she was skeptical that would work given the pattern of behavior. I could seek legal separation, which would formalize our living arrangements and protect my finances while giving us time to decide on divorce. Alternatively, I could file for divorce immediately based on irreconcilable differences. She said that, given my new promotion and salary, I needed to be extra cautious about how marital assets were divided and whether I'd be liable for spousal support. She recommended that I start documenting everything right away. Claire's text messages, financial transactions, and interactions with her parents. She also suggested that I freeze our joint accounts to prevent Claire from draining them, which apparently happens more frequently than I'd like to believe during contentious divorces. I left Rebecca's office feeling both clear-headed and nauseous. I'd come to the meeting hoping she'd tell me I was overreacting and that the situation could be resolved. Instead, she confirmed my worst fears that my marriage had fundamental flaws that extended far beyond one shocking revelation. I went to a coffee shop and called Luke to update him. He asked how I was doing, and I admitted that my life had been turned upside down in less than a day. Luke said, "Your life wasn't turned upside down last night. You finally saw what had been going on for years. Claire has repeatedly chosen her parents over you. Last night was just the most obvious example." His words stung because they were accurate. My phone had been constantly vibrating with messages from Claire and now her parents. Frank had texted that I had been extremely rude, and they wanted to meet to discuss this as adults. Margaret had sent a message about how upset they were by my reaction. And couldn't I tell they were just trying to be close to their daughter? Claire's messages had progressed from angry to worried to desperate, asking where I was, whether I was safe, and if we could talk. I replied to Claire with one message. "I am safe. I need time to process the fact that you made an important decision about our home without consulting me. I will contact you through my attorney." Then I blocked all of their numbers. That evening, I returned to our house during the hours when I knew Claire would be attending her Thursday evening yoga class. I needed clothing and personal belongings for the week. The house felt foreign when I walked in, like I was seeing it from the outside for the first time. Everything was decorated exactly as Margaret had suggested, from the beige walls to the traditional furniture. Our wedding photos appeared prominently. However, there were just as many photos of Claire and her parents. I went upstairs to our bedroom and started packing a suitcase with work clothes and toiletries. That was when I noticed the folder on Claire's nightstand. It was labeled New House Plans in her handwriting. The folder contained a nightmare. Architectural drawings showing our 3-bedroom house converted into a 4-bedroom by finishing the basement and adding a room above the garage. Contractor estimates totaling $91,000 for the renovations, a timeline showing work beginning in 5 weeks, a budget spreadsheet allocating my new hire salary to cover the construction costs, and ongoing expenses for 4 adults living in one house. The spreadsheet showed my entire raise and bonus going toward supporting Claire's parents. There was even a schedule showing which nights Margaret would cook dinner and which nights Claire would, implying they'd planned out our domestic life without my input. The dates on the documents went back almost 4 months, meaning Claire had been planning this since before I'd even gotten the promotion offer. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely take photos of the documents with my phone. I sent them to Rebecca Caldwell with a message saying, I'd found evidence my wife had been planning to move her parents in for months without telling me. Rebecca responded within minutes, saying to document everything and bring the originals to her office in the morning. I took the entire folder, along with the suitcase of clothes, and left. On my way out, I noticed a real estate flyer on the kitchen counter for Frank and Margaret's house in Westfield. It was already listed for sale at $418,000. They'd apparently been serious about selling and had been actively marketing the property while I'd been completely in the dark. I called Luke from the car and told him what I'd found. He let out a long whistle and said, "They were planning to use your promotion money to bankroll their move-in and house renovations without your consent. That's financial abuse, man. That's your wife treating you like a paycheck instead of a partner." I asked if the documents proved anything legally, and Luke said they proved premeditation and deception, which would absolutely help in a divorce. He said it showed Claire had been actively concealing major financial plans from me while making decisions that would legally obligate me to debt I'd never agreed to. He also said the timing was important because they'd clearly viewed my promotion as their financial opportunity. That night in the hotel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the spreadsheet that had allocated every dollar of my raise to expenses I'd never agreed to. The renovations budget, the increased grocery costs for 4 people, the utilities for a larger household, even line items for Frank's golf club membership and Margaret's garden club dues. They'd planned my entire financial future without asking me. I thought about all the times over the years that Claire had pressured me to give money to her parents. And I realized this had been the endgame all along. They'd been conditioning me to accept financing their lives until I'd gotten successful enough that they could just move in and have me support them full-time. Friday morning, I met with Rebecca Caldwell again and showed her the folder. She reviewed every document carefully, taking photos and making notes. She said, "This is actually extremely helpful for your case. It shows your wife engaged in secretive planning to obligate you to substantial debt and ongoing financial support without your knowledge or consent. In front of a judge, this demonstrates both financial misconduct and a fundamental breach of marital trust." She asked if I wanted to proceed with divorce or try separation first. I told her divorce. There was no coming back from this level of deception and disrespect. Rebecca said she'd draft the initial paperwork and we'd file by end of next week. She also recommended I immediately open a separate bank account and redirect my paychecks there since my new salary hadn't hit our joint account yet. I left work early Friday afternoon and went to my bank. I opened an individual checking account and set up direct deposit for my paychecks to go there instead of the joint account Claire and I shared. The bank manager, a professional woman named Madeline Harper, who'd helped us with our mortgage, asked if everything was all right. I told her I was going through a separation and needed to protect my assets. Madeline nodded sympathetically and said she'd seen this scenario too many times. She recommended I also get a credit monitoring service to ensure Claire didn't open any cards or loans in my name, which apparently happened in about 30% of contentious divorces. That hadn't even occurred to me. I signed up for monitoring immediately and requested a credit freeze. When I checked my credit report, I found something that made my blood run cold. There was a home equity line of credit application for $68,000 submitted 17 days ago in both my name and Claire's. It was still pending approval. I immediately called the bank and spoke to a loan officer who confirmed the application was in process and would likely be approved within days. I told them I hadn't authorized the application and wanted it canceled immediately. The loan officer said since it was a joint application, both parties would need to agree to cancel it. I asked if my signature was on the application, and the officer pulled it up and confirmed yes. Both signatures were present. I told them my signature was forged and I wanted to file a fraud report. The officer's tone changed immediately, and she said they'd flag the application for investigation and forward it to their fraud department. I called Rebecca Caldwell and told her about the forged loan application. There was a long pause before she said, "Your wife forged your signature to take out a $68,000 home equity loan without your knowledge. That's not just financial misconduct. That's criminal fraud." She said I needed to file a police report immediately, and she'd amend the divorce filing to include this information. She also said I should expect Claire to claim she thought she had my authorization or that I'd agreed verbally, so I needed to be prepared to prove I'd never discussed or approved a home equity loan. I told her I had proof. I'd been out of town for work the week the application was submitted according to the dates, and I had hotel receipts and plane tickets to prove it. I went straight to the police station and filed a report for identity theft and fraud. The officer who took my statement was Detective Simone Lawson, who'd been in financial crimes for 17 years. She reviewed the loan documents I'd gotten from the bank and my travel receipts showing I'd been in California for a conference when the application was supposedly signed. Detective Lawson said, "This is pretty clear-cut fraud. Someone forged your signature on a legal financial document. We'll open an investigation and contact the bank for their documentation. You understand this could result in criminal charges against your wife if the evidence supports fraud?" I said I understood, and I wanted to pursue it fully. She said she'd be in touch within about a week after they'd gathered initial evidence. That evening, Claire finally tracked me down. She showed up at the hotel lobby where I was having dinner and sat down across from me without being invited. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, and her hair pulled back messily. "We need to talk," she said. I told her I had nothing to say to her, and she needed to communicate through my attorney. Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I don't understand why you're being like this. My parents need help, and we have the space and money to provide it. Why are you making this into such a huge problem?" I stared at her in disbelief. "You made a decision to move your parents into our house without asking me. You spent months planning renovations and creating budgets using my salary without telling me. You forged my signature on a home equity loan, and you're asking why this is a problem." Claire's face went pale at the mention of the loan. "I didn't forge anything. I signed for both of us because you were traveling and the deadline was tight. I was going to tell you." I asked when exactly she'd been planning to tell me, before or after $68,000 of debt was added to our house. Claire said, "We need that money for the renovations. The contractors need a deposit, and my parents need help with their moving expenses. I knew you'd understand once you saw how perfect it would all work out." I told her she'd committed fraud, and I'd already filed a police report. The color drained completely from her face. "You went to the police against your own wife?" I stood up and said, "You forged my name on a legal document. That's a crime. Now, please leave, or I'll have hotel security remove you." Claire started crying in earnest now. Full sobs that drew attention from other diners. "Please, Ethan, we can fix this. I'll cancel the loan. We'll talk about everything. Just don't do this. Don't destroy our marriage over a misunderstanding." I told her it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal, and there was nothing left to fix. I walked away and went up to my room while she was still sitting in the restaurant crying. My phone started ringing immediately. First Claire, then Frank, then Margaret, then numbers I didn't recognize. I turned it off completely. The next morning, Saturday, I woke up to an email from Rebecca Caldwell saying she'd heard from Claire's attorney, a man named Anthony Russo, who specialized in family law. Anthony had sent a letter asking for a meeting to discuss settlement options before formal divorce proceedings began. The letter claimed Claire was willing to compromise on the living situation with her parents and wanted to preserve the marriage. Rebecca's email asked if I wanted to attend a settlement conference or proceed directly to divorce filing. I responded saying, "Proceed with the divorce. No meetings, no compromises." The trust was broken beyond repair. Rebecca filed the divorce petition on Monday morning. The grounds were irreconcilable differences, with additional claims of financial misconduct and fraud. The petition requested an equitable division of assets, no spousal support given Claire's deceptive behavior, and full financial disclosure from both parties. It also included the police report about the forged loan application as an exhibit. Claire was served with papers at her workplace on Monday afternoon. She called me crying and screaming, saying I'd humiliated her in front of her coworkers and destroyed her reputation. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail saying I was going to regret this, and her father's attorney would make sure I paid for what I'd done to their family. The legal discovery process was brutal and revealing. Both sides had to disclose all financial records, communications, and documentation related to marital assets. What emerged painted a picture even worse than I'd imagined. Text messages between Claire and her mother going back 18 months showed them discussing how to get money from me for various projects and expenses. Messages from Margaret saying things like, "Just tell Ethan it's an emergency. He always gives you money when you cry." Messages from Claire saying, "I'll wait until he's in a good mood after work to ask about the kitchen remodel." They'd been strategizing how to manipulate me for money the entire time. Even more damning were emails between Claire and a contractor that showed she'd been planning the house renovations for almost 4 months, since before I'd even been offered the promotion. The timeline showed she'd been counting on me getting the director position and had made plans based on salary information she'd somehow obtained from my company. One email from Claire to the contractor said, "My husband's promotion will be finalized in October, so we can start work in November. The new salary will easily cover the costs." She'd been so confident about using my money that she'd committed to construction contracts I'd never seen. The most shocking discovery came from the financial forensic analysis Rebecca had ordered. A financial investigator named Harvey Yates, who'd been doing forensic accounting for 24 years, reviewed all our joint accounts and credit cards. He found that over our 5-year marriage, Claire had transferred or spent approximately $79,000 on her parents. This included the direct cash gifts I'd known about, plus credit card charges for items she'd bought them, payments to contractors for work on their house, and transfers I'd never noticed buried among other transactions. Harvey's report showed a clear pattern of Claire treating our joint money as a fund for her parents' benefit. Even worse, the forensic analysis revealed that Frank and Margaret's house in Westfield had significant debt against it. They owed $275,000 on a property worth $418,000, meaning they'd refinanced multiple times and pulled equity out. The mortgage statements showed they'd been making only minimum payments for years, and were at risk of default. Their plan to sell the house and move in with us wasn't about being close to family. It was about escaping their own financial problems while having me support them. They'd been planning to use the equity from their house sale to pay off their debts and then live off my income indefinitely. The evidence was so overwhelming that Anthony Russo, Claire's attorney, called Rebecca to discuss settlement. Anthony admitted the discovery had revealed information his client hadn't fully disclosed to him about the extent of the planning and financial manipulation. He said Claire was willing to accept a 65/35 split of current assets and wouldn't seek spousal support if I'd agree to drop any claims for the money she'd given her parents and not pursue the fraud charges. Rebecca told him we'd consider it and hung up. She asked me what I wanted to do. I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds before saying I wanted to proceed to trial. I wanted a judge to see exactly what Claire and her parents had done. Rebecca said that was my right, but warned me that trials were expensive and emotionally draining. I told her I didn't care. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about accountability. Claire had spent years treating me like an ATM for her parents and had planned to obligate me to a lifetime of supporting them. I wanted that on the record. Rebecca smiled for the first time since I'd met her and said, "Then let's give them a trial they won't forget." The criminal investigation into the forged loan application moved faster than the divorce proceedings. Detective Simone Lawson called me 18 days after I'd filed the report to say the bank's fraud department had completed their analysis. The signature on the loan application was demonstrably different from my actual signature on file with the bank. Additionally, the IP address used to submit the application traced back to Claire's work computer, and the application had been submitted during hours I'd been provably in California based on my credit card usage and phone location data. Detective Lawson said the evidence was sufficient to charge Claire with forgery and fraud. She asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes without hesitation. Claire was arrested on a Monday morning at her office. I found out about it from a gleeful text from Luke, who'd heard through his legal network. Claire was charged with 1 count of forgery and 1 count of attempted fraud, both felonies. She was processed and released on $22,500 bail that Frank and Margaret had to scrape together. Her mugshot appeared in the local paper's crime section. Anthony Russo called Rebecca furious, claiming I was vindictively destroying Claire's life out of spite for the divorce. Rebecca calmly explained that forgery was a crime and the decision to prosecute had been made by the state's attorney's office based on clear evidence. If Anthony's client hadn't forged signatures on legal documents, she wouldn't be facing criminal charges. The criminal case added pressure to the divorce proceedings. Anthony reached out again with a settlement offer. Claire would accept a 65/35 split of assets in my favor, waive all claims to spousal support, and agree to pay my legal fees in the divorce if I'd ask the prosecutor to drop the criminal charges. Rebecca said I couldn't actually force the prosecutor to drop charges since it was a state case now, but I could decline to cooperate, which might make prosecution harder. I told Rebecca I'd cooperate fully with the prosecution. Claire had committed a crime and needed to face consequences. The settlement offer was rejected. As the divorce trial date approached, more information kept emerging. Margaret had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's the year before, which explained some of the increased need for support, but also revealed they'd been hiding significant medical issues. Frank had taken early retirement, not by choice, but because he'd been forced out of his job after a sales territory scandal that had nearly resulted in a lawsuit. Their financial problems were far deeper than just overspending. They'd been on a path to bankruptcy and had seen my promotion as their lifeline. Claire had known all of this and had chosen to conceal it while planning to obligate me to their care. The divorce trial was held in family court in front of Judge Raymond Oakes, who'd been on the bench for 31 years. Over 4 days, Rebecca presented the evidence methodically. The folder showing months of secret planning, the forged loan application, the text messages between Claire and her mother strategizing how to get money from me, the financial forensic report showing $79,000 given to her parents, the contractor emails proving premeditated deception, the analysis of Frank and Margaret's debt showing their desperate financial situation. Each piece of evidence built on the last until the picture was undeniable. Claire had spent our marriage treating me as a financial resource for her parents, and had planned to permanently obligate me to supporting them. I testified for nearly 7 hours over 2 days. Anthony Russo tried to make me look controlling and cold-hearted, asking if I'd really refused to help my elderly in-laws and if I'd vindictively pursued criminal charges against my wife. Rebecca objected to the characterization, and I answered calmly that I'd refused to be deceived and manipulated, which was different from refusing to help. I explained that I'd given Claire's parents tens of thousands of dollars over the years when I'd thought they had genuine needs. But discovering they'd been planning to move in and have me support them indefinitely, while hiding their true financial situation, had revealed the relationship had been based on deception. Claire testified in her own defense, and it went poorly. Under Rebecca's cross-examination, Claire admitted she'd never told me about her parents' debt or her mother's diagnosis. She admitted the house renovations had been planned in secret. She admitted she'd signed my name on the loan application without authorization. She tried to justify everything by saying she'd been trying to take care of her parents and knew I'd say no if she asked directly. Rebecca asked pointedly, "So, your solution was to deceive your husband and commit fraud rather than have an honest conversation about your concerns?" Claire couldn't answer coherently. Judge Oakes issued his ruling about a week after trial ended. He found Claire had engaged in systematic financial misconduct throughout the marriage and had violated the fundamental trust necessary for a marital partnership. He awarded me 68% of marital assets, including full ownership of the house. He ordered Claire to repay $37,500 of the money she'd given to her parents, representing half of the total amount that had been given without my knowledge or over my objection. He denied any spousal support and ordered Claire to pay 65% of both parties' legal fees. The written opinion was scathing, stating that Claire had treated the marriage as a vehicle for enriching her parents rather than as a partnership between equals. The criminal case went to trial 10 weeks later. Claire pleaded guilty to 1 count of attempted fraud in exchange for the forgery charge being dropped. She was sentenced to 30 months of probation, 180 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to the bank for their investigation costs. She also had a permanent criminal record. Her event planning career effectively ended since many venues wouldn't hire someone with a fraud conviction. The last I heard, she was working retail at a department store. Frank and Margaret's house in Westfield ended up in foreclosure after they couldn't keep up with mortgage payments once their plan to move in with me had failed. They eventually filed for bankruptcy and moved into a small assisted living apartment subsidized by Medicaid. Claire moved in with them to help with Margaret's care. The irony wasn't lost on me that Claire ended up supporting her parents anyway, just in a cramped apartment on a retail salary instead of in my house with my income. I sold our house 5 months after the divorce was finalized and moved into a modern condo downtown closer to work. The condo had floor-to-ceiling windows with city views and a private terrace, and it was entirely mine. I decorated it exactly how I wanted without anyone else's input. The first night I spent there, I stood on the terrace looking at the city lights and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. Free from manipulation. Free from obligations I'd never agreed to. Free from people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. My career continued to thrive. The director position led to a vice president role 16 months later with another substantial salary increase and equity package. This time, when I got the promotion, I celebrated alone with Luke and a few close friends who'd supported me through the divorce. No party, no announcements, just quiet satisfaction at my own success that belonged entirely to me. Luke raised his glass to promotions without hidden costs. We all drank to that. I began dating again after about a year. I was cautious at first when I met Haley Carter, a corporate trainer with a successful career. She'd been through a divorce herself and understood the value of boundaries and open communication. When we had been together for 5 months and began talking about moving in together, we sat down and had open discussions about finances, family boundaries, and how we would make major decisions together. Haley appreciated the directness, saying it made her feel safe rather than controlled. We've been together for almost 3 years and just got engaged. Her parents live in another state and come to visit twice a year for a week each. They stay at a hotel. Sometimes I think back to my promotion party, when Frank made his announcement and Claire agreed it was already decided. In that moment, my life was divided into before and after. Previously, I had been sleepwalking through a marriage in which I was valued for my income rather than myself. After that, I had established a life based on honesty and mutual respect. The shock of the public betrayal was devastating at the time. However, it had also been clarifying. It forced me to face the truth that I had been avoiding for years. My marriage was fundamentally broken, and I had been complicit in pretending otherwise. The severance was painful but necessary. The surgery, like removing a tumor, was painful, but ultimately saved my life. I'd lost a wife, but I'd found myself again. I had lost in-laws who saw me as a resource, but I had kept the family and friends who genuinely valued me. I'd lost the house we'd shared, but I'd gained the opportunity to create something genuine. The math worked in my favor. Looking back, the clearest indication of how wrong things had been was the moment I raised my glass and told them they could move in after I left. I hadn't planned those words. They'd come from a place deeper than conscious thought. From the part of me that had been yelling for years that this was wrong. That part was finally heard. And once I listened to it, once I trusted my instinct to protect myself, everything else fell into place. The evidence, the legal victory, And the new life had all stemmed from that single moment of clarity in which I chose myself over people who had never truly chosen me.